Welcome back, everyone, to the second Global Hub for the 5th Global Summit on Student Affairs and Services. Earlier today, the Interregional Hub for the Middle East, Asia, and Oceania met, and I really look forward to hearing how those conversations went. As it is a new day, I would like to again acknowledge Toronto, Canada, the virtual host location for our meeting, and the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Senecas, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, known to many as North America as a result of colonialism, and we are grateful to work on this land. If you'd like to know more about the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples from across North America, nativelands.ca is an excellent resource to help you navigate and understand. I'm really excited to be the moderator for our student panel for this session. As with past summits, for those who were engaged before, our student panel provides a very meaningful forum from learning from some of the students connected to our host institutions. Our 4 panelists, as you'll learn as we talk to them, are a really impressive bunch. Before I introduce them, I'd like to highlight the Q&A button in the Zoom meeting. If you have questions for the student panelists, please submit them through that feature so that we can get to as many questions as possible, and so that we just want to make sure we don't miss any that are in the chat. If a question is for a specific panelist, if you could please indicate who that question is for when you are posing that question. As far as format goes, I will give a quick introduction of each student and then ask them to provide a more detailed introduction, describing a bit about how their activities connect to the Sustainability Development Goals, how they've navigated the COVID-19 pandemic, and share what learning they've had with either themselves or with their clubs, and what they are thinking about for the future. With that, I'd like to launch into introductions. The full bios of our student panelists can be found on the Summit website at saglobalsummit.ca. I am going to go in alphabetical order, and so I'm pleased to first introduce Adam AlMasri first. Adam has extensive experience and engagement in technology and community building. Adam, I'd like to pass it over to you to introduce yourself and provide some comments on the mentioned items.
Thanks so much, David. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are today. My name is Adam AlMasri. I'm a graduating student at the University of Toronto in the programs of Computer Science and Indigenous Studies. I am a mature student, so I've had either the luck or bad luck of sticking around for the last 8 or 9 years in my undergrad, but the good luck in there is I've had the good fortune to participate in a fair amount of socially impactful initiatives in the last few years and really refine them. There's a few I'll speak to today, recognizing I've only got a couple of minutes and just keeping an eye on the time here as well. One of the biggest things that I've kicked off recently was an emergency food bank that runs online. So with the onset of the pandemic in March of 2020, a lot of issues around poverty were frankly amplified. And then one of those was food insecurity. And so the University of Toronto, being a fairly large institution, definitely also has a large population of the student body that suffers from issues related to poverty and inequality. So me and a few other students who have lived experience in poverty decided to launch an online food bank that to date has been supporting over, I'd say, 60 households a week, sending out roughly, I think at this point we've sent out probably 2,900 boxes of food. Although it is a food bank, we all recognize both through training and our own experience that there's no amount of food provision that can eliminate poverty. So what we're doing differently than sort of previous institutions that might have been running food banks on campus is to use it as a springboard to talk about social inequity to talk about the various socioeconomic challenges our students face, and then really what kind of impact that has on them in the classroom. It was definitely the case for me as a student that thinking about how to cover tuition, rent, and living expenses definitely distracted me from my ability to succeed academically and participate in extracurriculars. So we've been pushing forward on that, and we're hoping to run a lot of advocacy and lobbying campaigns to work both with the university and then sort of stakeholders at large, our municipal, provincial, and federal governments, at least in Canada, to see what types of policy interventions can be created to better support students who fall below the poverty line. Another project around the SDGs that I've been working on, and this is under a group called Engineers Without Borders, which is a poverty alleviation charity in Canada that aims to address the systemic root causes of poverty. I run the chapter's local poverty alleviation portfolio. And the project we run there is called Transit Access for Youth. And it's essentially a project that is partnered with the City of Toronto that aims to provide free transit for youth experiencing homelessness over a period of a few months, and to essentially measure change in quality of life. And again, to just better understand what types of policy interventions we have around transit equity or transit subsidies, really access to services across the City of Toronto that can better serve youth who frankly are currently being underserved. The only other project I've been on that I would say falls along the SDGs, and this isn't necessarily as part of a club, but rather in my capacity as an educator at the University of Toronto. I've been a head teaching assistant within the Department of Computer Science for the last 5 years. And one thing in a project in the structure I've been running for a few years is a software engineering partnership program where we actually invite grassroots institutions, the civil service, researchers, nonprofits, really anyone who has an aim to make a social impact in their community to partner with our students and deliver software that either serves their organization or serves their community. That has been a very interesting endeavor in terms of seeing all sorts of SDGs in play, everything from again, food security to access to education, to environmental systems, and a lot of work around the medical industry. In terms of navigating the pandemic, you mean our food bank itself launched in an online context, recognizing that a physical food bank wouldn't be feasible early on in the pandemic. Our transit access project, obviously we're on a pause at the moment. We've planned it. It's been accepted by a research ethics board, but we can't actually run it until we are able to until we are able to pass COVID at a certain point. But the biggest lessons I think we've learned through all of this is a need to find better ways to engage folks online, engage volunteers, and to just kind of retain volunteers over that period. It's quite challenging when there's pandemic fatigue setting in for a lot of folks. And I think I should end because I've been provided my warning moving into the future. Anything that I've learned is really just there are advantages to working in a remote context, especially in the case of our pandemic, especially in the case of our food bank. You know, we started it online, so it allowed us to be nimble, but obviously the disadvantages are people are fatigued easily, need to be able to build systems that allow folks to come in and come out and to lean on each other and to be engaged. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. And wow, a lot going on and really, really amazing work. So next up, we have Alex Gill. And Alex has extensive experience and engagement around climate action, and we are so pleased to have you here. Over to you, Alex, for an introduction and responses to those items.
Thank you so much, David and Adam. That's going to be really hard to follow. You just gave a great presentation. But as David said, my name is Alex, and I am a fourth-year undergraduate student at UTSC. I'm doing a double major in public policy and political science, but aside from school, everything that I do is kind of centered around climate action and sustainability. So back in February 2020, right before the pandemic hit, me and my best friend actually founded the Environmental Sustainability Society at UTSC. And we kind of started this because the sustainability office had closed on our campus. I can proudly say now that the position has been refilled and that the sustainability office is open and functioning, which makes me so happy. But we took it upon ourselves to fill that gap within our school community, and we wanted to advocate to our peers on how to be more sustainable. So the three biggest SDG goals that I would say are club targets is obviously number 13, climate action. I would say that climate action and sustainability kind of go hand in hand. And aside from that, number 12, responsible production and consumption, which is my personal favorite. I love the whole idea of creating a circular economy. And lastly, number 11, so sustainable communities and cities. So a couple of things that our club does is we try and show the school community individual habits that they can incorporate into their everyday lives that are more sustainable. One thing that I do that I've swapped out is I used to use actual shampoo and conditioner that came in plastic bottles. I now use the bars. They are a little bit to get used to, but the difference that you make from having less packaging and less plastic waste is insane. We also do things like workshops. So our last workshop was in collaboration with a club that is also environmentally oriented at UTSG. And we had a t-shirt upcycling event. So we took our old t-shirts and we turned them into tote bags. That's kind of what we focus on, is just things that are fun, inviting, that can get everyone into the conversation and also make a huge impact with minimal effort. So how has our club navigated the COVID-19 pandemic? As I said, we launched in February 2020. Unfortunately, we did not have the opportunity to have our first personal event in person. So we actually, this is something I'm really proud of that we did. When you have an event at U of T, or I'm sure any university that you come from, you have to submit a budget funding application, and we wanted to show our school community that you can have an event with minimum waste and you can actually make your event sustainable. So one thing that we did in our application is that we made sure that we budgeted for actual plates and cutlery, and we actually got approved for that. So I think that the funding proposal was around $500, and what we planned on doing was sharing the plates and cutlery that we actually got from the funding with other environmental groups at our campus. So when school does go back to being in person, fingers crossed that winter 2022 is going to be in person. We're really looking forward to hosting events where we get to share our reusable plates and cutlery with our fellow club peers. Aside from that, this summer, we're going to be having a lot of workshops. So we're going to be teaching students things like how to make your own deodorant and how to take food scraps and turn it into fertilizer. So during the pandemic, to keep myself busy, one thing I got really into myself was growing my own food and gardening. And I learned that you can take something like a banana and make the most amazing fertilizer for your plants that actually makes it grow so fast and so strong, as well as taking your coffee grounds that, you know, we cannot consume, but I love coffee myself. So taking fresh coffee grounds from my French press and putting it onto my plant to protect it from pests has been my new go-to. And moving into the future, what do you feel is important for your club? And has the pandemic taught you anything or changed your mentality? So the pandemic has actually taught me a lot. I've learned that Zoom fatigue is a thing. And we had one event this year. It was called the Sustainable Planning Certificate. And we had over 300 registered attendees. And we ended up giving certificates to 200 of those attendees. So it was a great turnout. And as I said, everything that we've been doing is entirely online. So to keep people out of the Zoom fatigue loop, we've kind of explored TikTok and we've done cute little life hacks on there. And we do the workshops, as I explained as well. For myself and for others, I'm sure that you've learned that marketing is also a huge thing for having your events to have a good turnout. So I've taken advantage of some of the free certificates that Google has to offer, and I got a digital marketing certificate, and I feel so much more confident in my ability to promote an event and make it successful. But we decided that during the pandemic, you kind of have the ability to be anywhere in the world, which is crazy because you can have a Zoom call with someone who is in New Zealand, you can have a Zoom call with someone who's in China, someone who's in South Africa, South America. It's incredible. So we actually created a nonprofit based off of our club at U of T. It's called the Environmental Sustainability Coalition. And through there, we actually had our first global event on May 11th. And we had as many student groups from around the world who are on university campuses advocating for systemic change get together. And we learned so much about everyone's different practices and methods to make their campus more sustainable. So what we thought is that we'd rather not waste time doing trial and error ourselves and hear from our fellow peers around the world about what's worked on their campus and what hasn't. So it's actually, if anyone wants to check it out, it's esccanada.org. That is our website for our nonprofit. We have over 8,000 unique site visitors and 400 website subscribers. We're just trying to create this intergenerational holistic definition of sustainability, because sustainability is this huge umbrella term and there's so many subcategories underneath it. So we have students and we have faculty members, we have work professionals, as well as just youth activists submit blog posts from their perspective on sustainability, hoping to encourage individual action from others, and that they come across one of the blogs, it really resonates with them and they incorporate those exact habits into their life. But thank you so much. I don't want to keep rambling, and I know I hit a lot of different points there. If anyone has any questions, I'm really happy to answer them during the panel, but thank you again.
Wonderful, Alex. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm just so impressed. And the fact that you were able to put together a global event during the pandemic and creating a new coalition is really, really amazing. So now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, who is Andy Darla Al-Hakim, who has been involved also in climate action initiatives and has been involved in the Global Commons, which you all learned about yesterday, that is run through Heart House. So over to Andy. Can you introduce yourself and provide some comments?
Well, thank you so much, David, for that amazingly succinct and accurate introduction to myself. Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning from wherever you are at the moment. I know that some people are joining us from a different time zone, and as an international student myself, I'm very much conscientious of that fact as well. So my name is Andy Darla Al-Hakim. I'm an incoming fourth-year undergraduate student doing the political science specialist here at the University of Toronto. Over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to be involved in several numbers of initiatives here on campus and off campus as well. I've had the opportunity to intern across 2 summers with the U of T President's Advisory Committee on the Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainability, which is a research portfolio, as well as another one with the U of T Environmental Action Student Group, which is, as David touched on earlier, is a climate advocacy group that we have on campus as well. One of my current positions as well is as the team lead for intercultural programming at the International Education Center here at the university, which is a student support office facing towards students and doing assisting them in whatever concerns that they have with adjusting, with trying to go for exchanges abroad, and a lot of those other exciting programming. And I also had the opportunity to be part of the fellowship with the School of Cities, in which sustainable development and the SDGs were very much at the top of our minds going into this. And we're also going to be creating a sort of policy collective back home in Indonesia, using technical spatial tools, trying to figure out how we could fill the gaps with the current government's flood contingency strategy. Because as we've seen in the capital of Jakarta, back home in Indonesia, flood is quite a big problem, and we really want to tackle that and really understand how sort of the tools that we learn as students can be applied back home as well, and how we could perhaps, if possible, advise the government in that regard. But I think for the purposes of this session and the audience that we have as well, I would be very interested to actually explore 2 specific opportunities that I've had. The first one is actually to be involved and currently co-chairing the Heart House Debates and Dialogue Committee based out of the university, which is one of the university's leading public discourse facilitating student organizations. We pride ourselves on being a dialogue-oriented advocacy group. And the other one that I would also want to explore is the Berlayar project that we do back home in Indonesia, which is this pre-college, pre-higher education peer mentorship program that we currently run. And so I think on the question of how our organizations have navigated the pandemic and what sorts of lessons we've learned from getting involved in these fields, I would say that definitely with the virtual setting, we could definitely have a broader scope, right? As Alex touched on earlier, broader scope when it comes to participants, and also a broader pool of sort of guest speakers and experts as well to invite into our sessions and hopefully sort of provide their insight towards the attendees. And so I think specifically with the Debates and Dialogue Committee, what we've seen is that the public conversations with leading minds from all around the world that we currently now have access to, right? Individuals from the US, from other countries as well. These would previously present a logistical challenge when we have in-person events. Definitely, we can't always fly individuals from other countries into Canada and support all their logistical needs. But with the virtual setting that we've seen throughout the pandemic, this is now possible. And so what we've done as well through the Debates and Dialogue Committee is actually host a mentorship, sort of long-term mentorship community engagement program with middle school students here in the Greater Toronto area in Canada, where we sort of engage and immerse them within the programming planning processes that exist at the university level so that they could sort of become acclimated and very much familiar to what expects them later on in your university. And one of the things that we're sort of want to walk towards as well is them to be able to collaborate with us on an event, which I think is pretty exciting. And as well, I think with the Berlayar project back home, we've done this 6-month-long group mentorship program where people from all across the province of Riau have access, right, to top performing students in Indonesia's top universities, which is kind of a challenge because the province that we're currently looking towards is very much far away from urban centers, and sort of the developmental phases that we've seen is not as advanced as we see in urban centers. And so what we want to hope to do is make sure that we instill into these individuals that they also have access to higher education, and that, you know, peers from their province also are in these higher educational institutions in these top Indonesian universities. And so we want to really bring those connections that we have, and really want to try and make sure that they really understand that they have a place there, so that you know, they would be really optimistic in going towards these top universities. And so I think with the next question of what I view being important for our club and sort of how the pandemic affects us going into the future, is that I think with the Debates and Dialogue Committee, we've seen that inclusivity really does matter, right? And that amplifying underrepresented voices should be what we are all about. But also what we've seen is that the timeliness and sort of the timing of conversations really does matter, right? Because conversations, when you hold them at the right time, sort of after a community galvanizing event or occasion, that is when you should have conversation, right? You can't have conversations 4 months after the fact and sort of hope that it has the same level of impact. And so this is what we're going to be striving towards in the future. We really do recognize that it's going to be difficult for us to sort of host conversations on the fly, right? Because preparation is everything for sure. But what we really want to do is sort of shorten the timeline between conversations, make sure that we hold conversations when it is timely to do so. And I think as well, lastly, for the Berlayar project, the mentorship program back home, I think that what the virtual setting and the pandemic situation has sort of dawned on us and make us realize actually is that pre-college prep is going to be very important now, and sort of building connections, right? Because we have a whole cohort going into university in a virtual setting, not necessarily having as much of that in-person connections as we previously, as you know, some of us usually have access to. And so sort of building connections between them through the mentorship program, beyond the mentorship program, is going to be very crucial. And so I think these are all interesting points. Look forward to interacting with everyone in the audience and with my amazing fellow panelists as well. And so, yeah, thank you so much, David, for the opportunity, and back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Andy. That is, again, so impressive. And, you know, I couldn't agree with you more about the mentorship being critical in advancing and getting people more engaged in the higher education and all the goals around SDGs. All right, so our last but not least, our final panelist, Kyla Shakulja, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, also has an extensive portfolio of accomplishments and activities. In particular, she's been engaged in work to support health and mental health within our communities. So over to you, Kyla, for an introduction and a brief response to the items identified.
Thank you so much, David, and welcome everyone from wherever you are in the world. My name is Kyla Shakulja. My last name gets mispronounced all the time. I am Serbian, so I am used to that being a thing. So I have just completed my 4th year at the University of Toronto, St. George campus, where I majored in health and disease and minored in immunology and psychology. So my focus on the UN SDGs is a little bit different from everyone else. I focus on goal number 3, which is health and well-being, and number 4, which is education. And throughout my undergraduate experience, I've engaged with a few different clubs to try to promote these goals. One of them that I am most proud of is Strengthen. We are a mental health club on campus that was founded in response to the growing mental health crisis. And our goal is to promote education around mental health as a way to deal with everyday stress. Unfortunately, a lot of mental health interventions deal with what to do during a mental health episode, and not a lot of them focus on prevention and how to cope with everyday life events, which during the COVID-19 pandemic is especially important. So we were founded in 2017 by a diverse group of undergraduate students, and we started off by giving mental health workshops to youth in the Greater Toronto area in Canada. So we were giving them to high school students, where we were talking about transitioning off to university, how to deal with the stresses of post-secondary education, and also just talking in a peer support setting, so folks realize that they're not alone in what they struggle with. And then in 2018, in response to the growing mental health crisis on the University of Toronto campus, we expanded our workshops, so we were able to give them as well to university students. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we shifted to a virtual medium, like pretty much all clubs had to do. And we took that as an advantage, as a way to expand our reach to high school students, middle school students, and elementary school students all over Ontario. Because since we were going to a virtual medium, geographical boundaries could be transcended. So we reached out to all different schools, all different communities, and tried to promote the importance of early mental health education and how to cope with stress. So we have a few different workshops. One of them is Mental Health 101, where we just talk about cognitive distortions and stigma and a way to just get a good conversation going in a peer support setting. So people can get comfortable talking about mental health and how to deal with stress. And then throughout the past few years, we've expanded our workshops. We've had a wide variety of students come in, and with the help of other mental health professionals, we were able to create workshops regarding stress and the adolescent brain, talking about why adolescents are so vulnerable to stress and what they can do to overcome it. We also talked about trauma, which is very important now in the COVID-19 pandemic, where we're teaching people how to overcome the different trauma they've experienced, why trauma occurs, and the cognitive mechanisms that go around it. We believe that education on the processes is very important to understanding why you may be feeling the way you're feeling. So we do have a bit of a cognitive behavioral therapy aspect, but we try to make it more accessible. Our workshops are free. We offer them to people of all ages, all over the communities, and from all different schools, groups. Even if people want to talk, we can do virtual drop-in sessions where we can just have a peer support chat and refer you to the appropriate resources if you do need professional help. And then the other organization that I was a part of is iCure. And this is a not-for-profit organization around the world that focuses on disease prevention. And I really, really love their motto, prevention is better than cure, because that is where a lot of my work throughout my activities has fallen under. So we actually started up during the COVID-19 pandemic. My friend and I started the University of Toronto chapter of the club, I believe, this past January. So we were already pretty into the pandemic. We knew what we were getting into because it was very difficult to keep attendance and promotions going during the virtual world. But we knew that health is more important than ever now. So we launched this club, which focuses on awareness of a healthy lifestyle, disease prevention, screening mechanisms for cancer, and everything along those lines. So we hosted a few events so far. One of them was actually with personal trainer Ramona Braganza, and she is a celebrity trainer who has trained people like Chris Evans, Holly Berry, Jessica Alba. So we had her come in, and she talked about the she talked about the importance of a healthy lifestyle. And especially now with us sitting in front of computers every now and then, she talked about realistic ways to do this. So over the COVID-19 pandemic, things have been hard. Attendance has been low for a lot of events. The Zoom fatigue is definitely real. So in terms of the lessons that we've learned the importance of transcending boundaries, of expanding our reach, because since we can go all around the world, we were able to. We collaborated with Yale University for some events for iCure. We went all over Ontario for events for Strengthen, and we are going to keep these virtual means moving forward. We also learned the importance of other events besides webinars. We've learned the importance of doing unique things to get people engaged, because the Zoom fatigue is unfortunately a real thing in this world. So we started up a podcast to talk about mental health, and people can share their stories and hear that they're not alone. And moving forward, we are very excited to keep going with that. And we've learned that our partnerships are extremely important to get the word out there, to build strength in the community, and just to expand the reach as much as we possibly can. So that is it for me. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to taking any questions that any of you may have about the work that we've been doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kyla. And thank you for all your work around mental health and student mental health and health. That's certainly a topic of importance at the University of Toronto. And I know it's felt in many institutions across the globe. So thank you for that work. I mean, wow, all four of you make me feel like I probably didn't do enough when I was a student. So really impressive group, and I'm really so great that you took the time to come and speak with us. So we are now moving into the Q&A portion of the panel. And as a reminder, if you could please submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen so that we can get to as many questions as possible. And if a question is for a specific panelist, please indicate who the question is for in your question. We have about 20 minutes, just shy of 20 minutes for the Q&A portion. And I do see that we already have some questions here. So this one is for all panelists. And this comes from Leona McCallum, and it is, do you expect that your student groups and initiatives will continue to thrive once we transition back to in-person learning? And have you thought of a plan for low engagement? I know some of you touched on this a little bit, but is there a panelist that wants to respond to that first? Maybe I'll just, oh, Andy, great. Thanks, Andy.
Sure, I'd be happy to start us a bit on this question. I think it's a wonderful question, definitely from Liana. And I think when it comes to whether or not, once we transition back to in-person learning and just how much engagement we will have, I think I'm a bit on the optimistic side that our sort of engagement levels are gonna go back to what they were before the pandemic or even exceed them. Because I think a lot of people, as with the sort of Zoom fatigue that my fellow panelists have mentioned, and also with just staying home for a lot of the course of the past year plus, I think once it is safe to do so, people would want to go to in-person events once more. And so I think engagement, at least for the first few months, I think we would see quite a boom in that regard. But I think as for the long-term plan, perhaps once everything, fingers crossed, goes back to normal, I think hybrid offerings would still have a place in our planning for programming, given how I think all of us agree how with virtual programming, you can have that broader scope, broader reach with things. And so I think it's definitely a balance, right? When you want sort of breadth, when you want to increase the breadth and scope of what you're doing, probably hybrid is the way to go. But as well, when you sort of want to increase deepened connections between the participants of a single programming, I think in person is still the way to go in that regard. But I think I'll pass it on to my other panelists as well. Yeah.
I can just jump in and comment as well. As Andy was saying, I think that there's going to be a huge need for in-person events as soon as campus is open. I think that people have been missing that aspect in their life. So I'm really excited to have in-person events. And two things that I just want to say that I think would be great ideas in terms of keeping campus more sustainable would be like at UTSC, if anyone knows, they have this beautiful valley. And I think that a tree planting in-person event would be fantastic, as well as almost like a thrift pop-up. So my last comment is just super excited to see people again, to have that in-person connection. I really miss that.
I can actually add on to that a little bit. So definitely for mental health, it is a sensitive topic. So we did actually enjoy doing the online events, especially for the younger students who are a bit more afraid to speak up, because we were able to use platforms such as Menti or Padlet, which allowed people to voice their own concerns or thoughts anonymously. So moving forward, I think we're going to go with a more hybrid nature because of the benefits that the virtual environment does have for topics such as this. Definitely for certain aspects of mental health, the in-person aspect definitely makes you feel more connected, and it may make it feel a bit more real. And I personally enjoy the in-person aspect of these types of workshops more, but I do believe that the virtual learning will also allow us to expand our reach more people, even in remote communities that we may not be able to access in person. So I feel the virtual means will definitely be able to help us reach more of the SDGs and just have a greater impact on people around the community.
I don't have anything to add. I'll just say I echo what everyone previously has said.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we have some more questions, so that's great. The next one comes from Neil Bedell, and it says, I think that the work you've done is so important, wonderful, inspiring, and necessary. How did you come to know the SDGs, and how would you suggest that we as student affairs folks mobilize them to inspire the importance of critical consciousness of the SDGs and, more saliently, critical actions for a better world in whatever form or scope, particularly as students deal with so much else, including finances, family, priorities, grades, etc.?
I don't mind taking that question
Great.
first, if that's okay. Yeah, so I came to know the SDGs through just social impact networks, for example, the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto. But actually, in my educational program, we introduced that as a theme. We were finding students were having a tough time finding solid project or concepts to turn into software. And so we'd encourage them to take a look at the SDGs and kind of use that as themes to build software and address pressing problems. And then all of a sudden we started to see a lot of interesting work coming from that. But in terms of how student affairs folks can mobilize them and, as you said, inspire the importance of critical consciousness of the SDGs, I think it's, in terms of supporting this kind of work, I think it has to be very critical in that it genuinely addresses the root cause problems, right? So for example, when I work in the food bank, we do partner with a fair amount of student affairs individuals, anything from our Office of the Vice Provost to conversations with Hart House and other institutions of the university. But we make it very clear that this doesn't stop at just a student club. And it's not simply an initiative by and for students. It is not simply designed to support people sort of in the short term, but rather we are asking everyone for a long-term commitment to sustainably addressing poverty within our institution. And then that commitment looks like funds, resources, but also allyship and sort of supporting our voices within the institution. I think one thing the pandemic has outlined is these problems have existed for a long time. They will continue to exist. And I think it is important that we recognize that there's no time to waste. And that any effort we put into any of this work can't simply be recreational or simply for the purposes of an extracurricular activity, but rather should be meaningful and directed to hopefully making some of our student clubs actually redundant. Like I would love for our food bank to disappear in the next 3-4 years because it means that everyone has done their work right.
I can jump on top of that as well. So what I will say is that what's really been cool about this event is that each of us have different SDGs that we're targeting, all of us panelists, which is amazing because that just shows how broad the spectrum is. But aside from that, I think that you kind of had to find your niche within the SDGs. So number 17 is actually partnerships to completing the goals. And I would say that based on what you've heard today and what you're studying, what your passions are, you have to kind of find what SDG you're directly involved with and what you can make the biggest impact with. And you can only hope to create a domino effect, which is something that I say over and over again. So once you start incorporating actions or you start advocating, you're going to have family and friends ask you questions, and all you can hope for is that they're going to take your new positive mentality on, completing these goals and take it into their own hands and start incorporating actions that will then again affect someone in their life and give that positive impact. But to anyone who's here who is a U of T student, there is an amazing course called Pulse 88. It's called the New International Agenda, and that teaches you all about the SDGs. And it was probably my favorite course of my undergrad so far.
Great, thanks, Alex. And I see Andy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm very interested as well. I think with the framing of the question in regards to the perspective that we come from, as well as like from the perspective of student affairs folks, I think I have the opportunity to currently work in a student support office as well in the International Education Center at UTM, not as a permanent staff, as a student staff, but I think the perspectives that we sort of have access to is pretty interesting as well. I think when it comes to introducing the concept, the framework of the SDGs to students, it is sort of perhaps the way that we don't want to go is like directly hold sort of workshops on the whole framework in one go, because that's going to be like overburdening students, right? I think it's sort of a slow injection of sort of exposing them to it so that they slowly become familiar to it. And I think one way in which we can do this, and this is something that our office is actually experimenting as well with our programming, is that every time we release programming and sort of market it, what we want to do is sort of at the top right corner of it, just put sort of 3 or so SDGs that this programming actually relates to. So which ones these touches, right? And so the way in which we think this could actually inspire students to want to know more about it is like they now see that sort of this SDG designation appears in every marketing thing that our office or hopefully later on the university puts out. And they'll be like, what is this framework? And then hopefully once that programming gives them a lot of benefit or they sort of find something good out of it, they'll be like, okay, this seems like a pretty good thing. So let me sort of want to dive further into it. And so I think sort of the marketing aspect of this is kind of a good first step, I would believe. But I definitely agree with my fellow panelists as well that there's like sort of 2 steps to this, right? The first one is you want to get them familiar with the concept of the framework. Then the second one is like, you want them to really understand what the whole 17 SDGs are all about and sort of immerse in what they want to touch on. And so I think the marketing strategy is a good strategy for the first one, perhaps, just getting them familiar with the concept of the SDGs. But the sort of further immersion to it, I think the solution is what all my fellow panelists have touched on earlier. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And maybe I'll ask this next question because it is actually somewhat related to the responses you all provided, in case Kyla has a response or others do. But what is the most helpful support offered by your university while you've been undertaking these initiatives you described during the pandemic? And are there additional types of support that post-secondary institutions could offer student leaders that would be most helpful and impactful in undertaking your efforts? So Kyla, over to you.
So one of the most important resources that I've learned about throughout my time is the Student Life Office, because they have so many connections, both to clubs, to even to other universities and in the community. So I remember when we were struggling with securing funding for events, because virtual events, it was hard to get them funded. And also we were struggling to get attendance to the virtual events because of the Zoom fatigue. I reached out to our Student Life coordinator and I said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is why this is important. Do you have any advice? And she referred us to all these different newsletters that she told them about us. And we were published in these newsletters for the University of Toronto students, and our attendance started to increase after that. She referred us to different grants that we can get, so that way we could do some more marketing and advertising about these events. Because one of the hardest things is when we're promoting these events in the university Facebook groups, there's so many virtual events that often they just get overlooked. So unfortunately, paid marketing was something that we needed to do in order to stand out. So she gave us some advice on where to look for that, on how to apply for grants for that. And honestly, I don't think we would have been able to start up iCure without her help and her guidance. So the Student Life Office, because of all the resources that they have, I would definitely recommend them for clubs or other individuals who may be looking for some assistance in the community.
Great, and we still have 2 more questions and about 6 minutes. So if it's all right, I'm just going to get to those next 2 questions. I'm going to combine 2 of the questions together because they actually are related to each other. But the first one is, can you describe the biggest challenge you faced as a student leader and with your organization in executing the activities or your initiatives?
I can quickly start. I'll just give a quick point because I want everyone to be able to speak. I think that COVID, especially because we're all isolated and not together, there's been like a lot of people who are just unmotivated, especially people who, you've watched people who have like these bright shining personalities turn into like these really dull, like depressed, like people on camera, and you can't do anything to help them. So that has been like a huge problem with my team specifically. And I care about the people that I'm working with, obviously, and that are volunteering their time. So we actually decided to have a day of the week where we just have a session together and nothing is talked about sustainability wise. We just have like board games online and just get to know each other more. And that's been a great support for people on my team.
I can add on to that, actually. What you said about motivation, I could not have said any better myself. It's hard to get others motivated to join your events. And also that makes your team not as motivated because they're not as motivated to plan or to get all excited about these events, which we should be because we're doing some great things in the community and we should be excited about the work that we're doing. But unfortunately, it's a domino effect with it's hard to reach people, it's hard to get attendance, and then it's hard to stay passionate about what you're doing because you tend to think, well, is what I'm doing really that important? But it is, and you got to remember that. So that was one of the biggest challenges for us, definitely the motivation aspect as well.
Could continue to add on, and maybe specifically to Marlon's question. I think it's important to provide people autonomy, ownership, and reward for the work that they're doing. So we follow quite a few, I guess, community organizing principles where there's less of a hierarchy in our group where people are taking direction, but rather we're galvanizing individuals sort of behind our initiative. We're establishing a shared value system in that relationship and enabling them to use our work as a platform to do something further. So our food bank is interested in running other projects around like grow your own gardening kits, food drives, educational programs, so on and so forth. I found that works really well to keep people motivated. And maybe to add to Kyla's point, allowing people to see their work manifest into real impact. And I think that comes with expectation setting, right? The fact of the matter is I don't know that maybe a few weeks or a few months worth of this work will have a large impact or even a measurable impact. But definitely if you're able to have people on board for a year or 2 years, I've seen a lot of our projects that my teams have genuinely seen the impact of their work, and that sort of motivates them to go further, or if anything, even take a sort of a career change in the middle of their undergraduate education because they've seen the power of their work.
Andy, do you have anything to add to that? It's okay.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what's been said so far. And I think, yeah, sort of small, quick wins are important to make sure that people stay motivated in what they're doing. And I also had a quick thought as well. I was thinking, like a big challenge that we've seen perhaps over the past year with the pandemic is that honestly, this past year has seen so many crises, right? Our student organizations have been deliberating that quite a bit as to which crisis we want to tackle. We definitely can't tackle all of them, and it's sort of like a decision paralysis as well in that regard. But I think, as Alex touched on earlier, it's very important to just find our niche and try to contribute to that, and not worry with the sector that we want to address but can't yet, because some other amazing people would have touched on that for sure. And definitely with like the context of a big institution like U of T and other institutions that our audience belong to as well. the student population are amazing. So people are already doing things in that regard, I'm sure.
Great, thank you. And so I really only have a minute left for this last question, but you have actually touched on it a little bit throughout. But we are expecting sort of a double cohort of students because we have a whole group of students who didn't come to campus last year. They were all online. And so what advice would you provide us to help introduce new students to the SDGs? If you have anything to add beyond what you've already shared. Go ahead, Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I've finally been able to find the raise hand feature when you zoom in and out. Sorry. Yeah, I think cross-pollination is important, right? The SDGs shouldn't necessarily be the responsibility of student groups. I think you should be able to see it prominently displayed everywhere. You know, whether it's part of an experiential learning program within a sort of first-year course or a seminar or even upper-year courses. Whether it's sort of the basis of a lot of student groups, whether it's the basis of research, or whether it's some sort of initiative run by various student-like organizations that provide a framework for people to understand the SDGs and to be able to grab resources to be able to participate in that. I think that's one way to sort of allow people to immerse themselves in that context without having to choose between the various commitments they have to be able to engage in it. And I think my students in particular have admired the fact that they can tackle the SDGs, get an A and throw something on their resume all at the same time while building their network, not necessarily have to put time into a student group through their busy schedules.
Great, any last comments?
I was just going to say, I think Adam gave a great recap on that question, so I have nothing to add.
Oh, my fellow panelists, you guys did amazing. So thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing. It was great to hear all of your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll join everyone in applauding Adam as well for that response.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, thank you all so much for taking the time to do this panel. I know I'm so impressed with all the work you're doing, and I can tell by the engagement in the Q&A. I'm sure if we had more time, we would have questions for hours. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with us. We do have many representatives from countries around the world, and I'm sure I can speak for everyone that you've given us a lot to think about and really helped us in shaping the work that will continue for the rest of the summit in the next day and a half. So this does close our student panel. So I don't know in this webinar setting if there's a way to for everyone to join me in virtually thanking them for participating, but thank you so much. Before we wrap up right now, I just do want to remind people of what's coming up next. As a reminder, there are the pre-recorded sessions that we're hoping that all participants can review and look at. There's 26 great sessions, and if you can review them before Thursday, which is tomorrow, so that we can have an engaging Q&A with those presenters. In about 5 minutes time, we are going to be starting up the Interregional Hub for Africa, Europe, Caribbean, Central America, and North America. And then on Thursday, and we'll send out another reminder email, there will be the Q&A for the pre-recorded sessions. Then there will be presentations from the interregional hubs, and then we'll talk about next steps and announcement of the next global summit. So with that, thank you everyone for taking the time to hear from our students, and I hope you all have a great day.